It was 6:42 p.m. when Alina stepped into the grocery store, her baby pressed against her chest in a second-hand carrier, his tiny hand curled tightly around her tattered shirt. The fluorescent lights above were too bright, almost exposing the cracks. She tried so hard to hide dark circles under her eyes, frayed jeans, and shoes she had glued back together just a week ago. Her hand gripped a small crumpled list, though it only had one item today: baby formula. Her son Mikhail had barely eaten since morning. Her stomach had growled all day, but she had trained herself to ignore it. Not him. Never him. As she approached the baby aisle, she could feel the weight of judgmental glances. She always did. Her once hopeful life had quietly eroded into survival mode. But she refused to cry in public. Not anymore. The formula she needed cost $10.75. She knew this because she had counted her coins 5 times earlier at the bus stop. All she had were $11 in dimes and quarters, every penny earned cleaning 2 apartments that week. She picked up the smallest tin, clutching it like it was treasure. Holding Mikhail tighter, she walked toward the checkout lane, her face pale and tired, yet carrying the quiet strength of a mother with no one else to lean on. At the checkout, she placed the formula gently on the counter, reaching into her jacket pocket and slowly laying out the coins. One by one. The cashier looked at her, not with unkindness, but with that uncomfortable patience reserved for people who were visibly counting down their last few chances in life. Behind her, a tall man in a dark suit stood next in line. His phone buzzed in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. His gaze was fixed on the girl ahead, frail, nervous, clearly struggling. He saw the baby, wide-eyed and silent, and the way the young mother was holding back tears, trying to act composed as if she did this every day. He tilted his head slightly. Something about her felt oddly familiar. Alina's hand trembled as she counted the last 3 coins. She looked up nervously. Is it enough? She whispered. The cashier nodded slowly. Yes. It is. Alina let out a quiet sigh of relief and looked down at Mikhail, pressing her lips to his forehead. But her moment was cut short when a voice behind her said, half confused, half shaken, Alina? She froze. No one had called her name like that in years. Not since her university days. Not since the life she had abandoned when tragedy struck and poverty consumed everything she once had. She turned slowly. The man in the suit was staring at her, his mouth slightly open, as if caught between disbelief and guilt. Ethan? She said almost breathlessly. He nodded. My God, I didn't even recognize you at first. Ethan Carrington. The name echoed like thunder in her mind. The once awkward boy from college who used to stutter during presentations. Now wearing a custom-tailored suit, a Rolex glinting from his wrist, and eyes filled with a kind of sadness she couldn't quite place. He looked at the formula in her hand, then at the coins still on the counter. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice suddenly soft. All these years. You never reached out? Her throat tightened. She hadn't spoken to anyone from her past in years. Not since the accident. Not since losing everything. Alina picked up the formula, her knuckles white around it. I didn't think you'd remember me, she replied quietly, or care. The baby shifted in her arms. Ethan stepped forward slightly, but she had already turned to leave. Alina stepped outside the grocery store, the formula tin hugged tightly to her chest like a lifeline. The evening wind had picked up, brushing against her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was spinning. Ethan Carrington. The name had once belonged to a quiet, awkward boy who sat in the last row of their economics class. She remembered how he'd always worn oversized jackets and scribbled formulas in the margins of his notebook like they were poetry. But this Ethan, the one in the navy blue tailored suit, with eyes that held boardroom confidence and a phone that probably had a Fortune 500 contact list. He was someone else now. She had barely made it halfway down the sidewalk when she heard his voice again, this time more breathless. Alina! Wait, please. She turned slowly. The baby in her arms blinked sleepily, his belly finally full. Ethan jogged up beside her, confusion and concern etched across his face. I didn't mean to shock you. It's just ... I honestly thought I'd never see you again. Alina gave a faint, polite nod. Likewise. There was an awkward silence. He glanced at the baby. He's beautiful, he said. She managed a small smile. His name's Mikhail. Ethan nodded, as if trying to memorize every detail in her face. Is he ... You're my son, she cut in gently. Yes, he's my entire world now. Ethan's gaze dropped, as if he wasn't sure what to say. Where do you live now? A small rental over on Greenpoint, she replied. It's not much, but it's warm, and Mikhail doesn't cry at night anymore. She paused. We manage. He flinched at that word. Manage. It carried too much weight for someone who clearly had so little. Ethan cleared his throat. Alina, what happened? You were one of the brightest in our year. You got that scholarship. You were going to intern at Kensington Capital. Then you just vanished. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on a passing car. A lot can change in a year, she said finally. My mother got sick. Hospital bills started stacking up. I dropped out to care for her. She passed away a few months later. After that, things just unraveled. He stood there, stunned. You never told anyone? No one knew. She shook her head. What would I have said? That I went from top of the class to cleaning motel rooms? I didn't have the strength to explain that kind of fall. The silence between them thickened. Ethan's chest tightened with something unfamiliar. Guilt, regret, helplessness. I run a foundation now, he said slowly. For single parents. We fund childcare, education, housing. I could... No, she said quickly, raising a hand. I'm not a charity case, Ethan. I know, he said instantly. That's not what I meant. If I had known if you had told me back then, I would have what? Her tone softened. You were still trying to find yourself too. You were struggling to be seen. I remember how people laughed at your startup idea. He smiled faintly, nostalgic. Yeah, look at them now. She smiled back, the tiniest flicker. Of the girl she once was, I'm not ashamed, she said after a moment. Life didn't go as planned, but I have Mikhail. And even on the hardest days, he reminds me why I keep going. Ethan stared at her, not with pity, but with admiration. She hadn't just survived. She had endured. And he felt something stirring deep in his chest. Not just an urge to help, but a pull he hadn't felt in years. Alina, he said quietly, would you let me drive you home? She hesitated. He raised a hand. Just the ride. No strings. I'd like to make sure you both get home safe. She glanced down at her son, then back at Ethan. Okay. And so, for the first time in years, Alina sat in a luxury car, not as a passenger of success, but as a mother with nothing left to prove, and a past quietly re-entering her life in the form of a man she never expected to see again. The hum of the luxury car was barely audible, but inside, Alina's thoughts were deafening. She sat in the back seat, Mikhail sleeping peacefully in her arms. Ethan glanced at her from the rearview mirror more than once, but said nothing. The silence was not awkward, but thick with things that wanted to be said. As they turned a corner, she spoke softly. This car smells like cedarwood and coffee. Ethan smiled. Old habit. I keep those sachets in the glove compartment. Helps me think. She raised an eyebrow faintly. Still overthinking like you used to? His laughter was low, genuine. Only when it comes to people who matter. That silence returned, but this time it carried warmth. When they reached her neighborhood, the scenery changed. From glass-fronted shops and well-lit streets, they entered cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, and small apartments with rusty gates. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. "This is it," she said, pointing to a narrow building. With peeling paint and a flickering security light, Ethan parked without a word. He stepped out, opened the back door for her, and gently held it open as she stepped out with Mikhail, still sleeping on her shoulder. They stood for a moment at the base of the stairs leading up to her unit. She didn't want pity. He didn't offer it. And perhaps that was why she didn't stop him when he asked, "Can I come up?" just to say goodbye properly. Alina nodded hesitantly. "It's small and not pretty." "I'm not here for the decor," he replied. Inside, the apartment was modest but clean. A tiny couch, a worn-out bookshelf, and a curtain that separated the kitchen from the bedroom. Toys were neatly stacked in a plastic bin. A single family photo, Alina and Mikhail, hung on the wall. Ethan looked around quietly, taking it all in. It was a life built from fragments, stitched together by willpower and love. "You've done well," he said finally. Alina exhaled, placing Mikhail gently in his crib. "It's not much." "No," Ethan replied. "It's everything." She turned, and for a moment, their eyes met not as people from different worlds, but as souls who once sat side by side in a university library, dreaming of futures they couldn't yet imagine. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it. It was an article from a local paper dated 4 years ago. A small paragraph tucked in the corner. Local student Alina Hayes drops out of Kensington program after sudden family tragedy. Sources say her mother passed away after a battle with cancer. She stared at the words, her hands trembling slightly. "I kept that," Ethan said. "I didn't know what happened at the time. But when I found this, I tried to look for you. You'd moved, changed your number. No social media. I wanted to disappear," she whispered. "I wanted to find you," he replied. Alina sat down. Slowly, the paper still in her hands. "I'm not the same girl anymore, Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm tired. I'm scared most days. I worry if Mikhail will have milk tomorrow. I haven't felt beautiful in years. I don't have anything left to offer anyone." Ethan knelt in front of her, leveling his eyes with hers. "You offered your strength to a child, when the world gave you nothing in return," he said gently. "That's more than most people ever do. And for what it's worth, you were always beautiful. Not because of what you had, but because of what you gave." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Why didn't you ever forget?" "Me?" she asked. He smiled, that same quiet smile he wore back when they were 20. "Because back then, when no one believed in me, you did." And for the first time in years, something cracked in Alina's heart, not from pain, but from healing. The next morning, Alina awoke before dawn, as she always did. Mikhail stirred softly in his crib, and she tiptoed to the kitchen to warm some milk. Her body ached, not from illness, but from exhaustion. The kind that lived in the bones of those who had carried too much for too long. She thought of last night, Ethan's voice, his words, and especially that newspaper clipping. He had searched for her, held on to that tiny scrap of her story all these years. But why now? Why reappear? Just when she had finally accepted solitude as her fate? Before she could finish her thoughts, her phone buzzed out one new message. "Ethan Carrington. I meant what I said last night. I have a proposition. Not out of pity, out of belief. Can we meet again? Today, 10 a.m. at my office. Bring Mikhail. If you need to." Alina stared at the message. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She had met too many people who promised help only to offer judgment. But something in Ethan's eyes had been different, genuine. familiar. By 9:50 a.m., she was nervously stepping off a bus in front of a towering glass building with Carrington Holdings printed in gold on the entrance wall. Receptionist smiled as Alina approached. "You're Ms. Hayes? Mr. Carrington is expecting you." She was ushered through clean marble floors into an elevator, and then to the 30th floor where the glass walls opened to a breathtaking skyline. Ethan stood by the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. "You came," he said without turning. "I almost didn't," she replied honestly. He turned to face her, smiling softly. "But you did. That's what matters." She sat across from his desk, Mikhail on her lap, curiously staring at the buttons on the table. Ethan slid a folder toward her. "I want to offer you a job," he said. Alina's eyes widened. "What?" "I run a corporate mentorship and outreach program," he explained. "It's a department that helps young mothers, formerly homeless individuals, or those with interrupted education to rebuild their professional lives. I want you to help run it. You've lived what they're going through. You'll bring authenticity, compassion, real leadership." Alina blinked. "I haven't had a proper job in years, Ethan." "I'll train you," he said. "We'll start with part-time hours. You'll have access to childcare, a housing stipend, everything you need to build again on your terms." Her lips parted slightly, too stunned to speak. "This isn't a favor," he added firmly. "This is an investment. In you, in what you can do." A long silence followed. Mikhail babbled happily in her arms, unaware his mother's world was shifting beneath her feet. Finally, she said, "Why me, Ethan? There are people more qualified, more stable. I'm just surviving." Ethan leaned forward. "Because the world has enough people with degrees and suits. It needs people who've walked through fire and still chose kindness. People like you." Her fingers tightened around Mikhail's little hand. "You really believe I can do this?" she whispered. "I've always believed in you," he replied, without hesitation, "even when you didn't." Tears welled up in her eyes. This wasn't charity. This was someone holding a mirror to her soul and finally showing her the version of herself she had long buried under diapers, debts, and defeat. "I'll do it," she said, voice trembling. "But not for me, for him." She looked down at her son. "I want him to grow up and see that we didn't give up, that we stood back up, even when everything was broken." Ethan smiled. "Then let's begin." And just like that, the girl who had once counted coins in shame now had a key to an office on the top floor, not because she was rescued, but because she had endured long enough to rise. Alina sat at her new desk just 1 week into her job. The title plate on the table read, Alina Hayes, Community Program Coordinator. It still felt surreal. Each morning, she dressed Mikhail, dropped him at the in-office daycare provided by Carrington Holdings, and climbed to the 26th floor with trembling hope. Her clothes were still simple. She wasn't polished. But she stood taller now because she had purpose. Ethan had stayed true to his word. He didn't micromanage her, didn't hover. He checked in once a day, offering feedback, encouragement, and coffee that always came with a kind smile. Still, not everything was easy. Some days she battled imposter syndrome. Sitting in meetings with executives made her palms sweat. Once she had spilled tea on a printed report and spent the whole day near tears. But then a woman came into her office, a tired, defeated mother of 2, and broke down while explaining. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Alina didn't speak as a boss. She spoke as a woman who had once been there. That's when she realized she didn't need to be perfect, just present. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the skyline, she heard a soft knock on her office door. "Come in," she said, assuming it was an intern. But when the door opened, her breath caught in her throat. A tall, well-dressed woman in heels stepped inside, blonde hair in a tight bun, sharp features, and a stare that had once reduced Alina to silence in a courtroom. "Hello, Alina," the woman said. Alina stood up slowly, her face paling. "Claudia?" "Claudia Reynolds?" Mikhail's paternal grandmother. The same woman who had once tried to take her baby away when Mikhail's father, a man who abandoned Alina during her pregnancy, had died in an accident. The same woman who had told the court Alina was unfit to raise a child with no income, no education, and no family. "What are you doing here?" Alina said cautiously. Claudia didn't smile. She looked around the office like inspecting a strange museum. "I heard you were working for Ethan Carrington." Imagine my surprise. Alina straightened her spine. "If you're here to challenge custody again, don't waste your breath." Claudia gave a clipped chuckle. "No, I lost that battle and your son seems well fed, for now." Alina's eyes burned with restrained anger. "Then why are you here?" Claudia stepped closer. "Because Ethan Carrington is a powerful man. And your involvement with him personally or professionally reflects on his brand. You're walking among giants now, Alina. Don't give them a reason to step on you." Alina's jaw tightened. "I earned my place here. We both know you didn't walk in through the front door like everyone else. You were helped. You were pitied." Before Alina could reply, another voice filled the room, sharp and firm. "That's enough." Ethan stood in the doorway. Eyes narrowed. "Ms. Reynolds, you are not welcome here. This office supports people rising from their past, not those who try to chain others to it." Claudia opened her mouth, but Ethan stepped between her and Alina. "If you ever show up here again to intimidate my team or my friend, I'll make sure every board you sit on hears about your threats." Claudia's lips thinned. "You'll regret choosing her." "No," Ethan said calmly. "The only thing I regret is not finding her sooner." And just like that, Claudia turned on her heel and left. The door closed, and for a moment, silence held the room. Alina sat down slowly, her hands shaking. Ethan walked to her and gently placed a hand on her desk. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "I didn't know she still kept tabs on me." "She won't bother you again. I'll see to it." Alina looked up at him, her voice cracking. "You don't have to protect me, Ethan. I know," he said. "But maybe I want to." And in his eyes, she saw not just a CEO or a former classmate, but a man who truly understood what it meant to rebuild from ashes. 3 weeks had passed since Claudia's sudden visit. Alina hadn't spoken of it again, and Ethan hadn't pushed. But something had shifted. He began stopping by her office more often, not as a CEO, but as a friend. He brought her tea instead of coffee because he remembered she hated the bitter taste. He began joining her during her lunch breaks in the small employee courtyard. And sometimes, when no one was looking, he'd make Mikhail laugh louder than Alina ever could. But Alina had grown careful with hope. Life had taught her to guard her heart as fiercely as she guarded her son. One Friday evening, just as she was packing up to leave, Ethan appeared in her doorway, a rare nervousness in his stance. "Are you busy tonight?" he asked. Alina looked up, puzzled. "Depends. Why?" "I'm attending a benefit gala," he said. "All board members are expected to bring someone. I was going to go alone, but then I thought of you." She blinked. "Me? At a gala?" "You belong in rooms like that," he said, his voice warm. "Not just because of your job, because of your strength." "I want the world to see what I see." She hesitated. "I don't have anything to wear. You do now." He stepped aside, revealing a garment bag gently hanging on a rolling stand. "I asked my assistant to guess your size. She has a good eye." Alina slowly stood, her heart pounding. "This doesn't feel real." "Then let's make it real," Ethan whispered. That night, Alina stood in front of her mirror. For the first time in years, she saw not just a survivor, but a woman, radiant, determined, beautiful. The dress was a soft navy blue satin, elegant and simple. Her hair, done by Ethan's stylist, flowed gently over her shoulders. Mikhail was with a trusted sitter, his tiny giggles ringing in her ears as she stepped into the car. The gala was everything she imagined: chandeliers, music, elegance. And yet, none of it matched the way Ethan looked at her when she entered the ballroom. He extended a hand. "You ready to show them?" She smiled. "I'm ready to show me." As the night unfolded, people approached Ethan, curious about his guest. He proudly introduced her as the newest addition to Carrington Holdings, and more than once he used the word visionary. Not rescued, not rehabilitated, visionary. But it was during a slower moment as they stood at the edge of the ballroom, near the windows, that Alina asked softly, "Why are you really doing all this?" He turned toward her, his gaze unflinching. "Because I once stood in front of a girl who believed in me when I had nothing. No money, no power, no confidence. She reminded me who I could become, and I've never stopped hearing her voice." Alina's breath caught. Her eyes searched his. "I thought you forgot about me," she whispered. "I never did," he said. Not for one day. The music shifted into a slow instrumental. Ethan offered his hand again. "Dance with me?" She hesitated only for a second, then placed her hand in his. They danced slowly, gently, a CEO and a mother, a forgotten dreamer and a survivor, in sync not because of their steps, but because of the journey behind each one. As the music faded, Ethan leaned in, barely above a whisper. "I don't just want to be the man who helped you back on your feet. I want to be the man who walks beside you from now on. If you'll let." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. She had spent so long thinking no one would ever see her again. But here he was, seeing her. All of her. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "So am I," he said. "But I'm not walking away." And in that moment, surrounded by chandeliers and applause and polished shoes, Alina knew she didn't have to keep surviving alone anymore. She had found love, not in wealth, not in rescue, but in understanding. And as the night ended, she stepped into the future not as a poor girl with a tin of baby formula, but as a woman who had risen and finally been seen. N.D.